Very good evening, everyone, and very good morning to Dr. Bele. And because it's just early morning in USA right now, and Dr. Bele is joining us from California. Yes, it's from California, right? Yes. And I welcome to all of you for day 4 of our third SARA Summer School, R4 researchers. I will share a brief about SARA and about this summer school, and then we will go for today's talk. So, SARA name is formed from the name of two great Indian leaders, Savitribai Phule ji and Ramabai ji. And we intentionally kept two feminine to female leaders from India because we want women representation in tech in India as well as at the global level. And Sara, from 3 years, we believe that education is for everyone. That's why we provide low-cost, open-source data science education to, especially to the marginalized communities and women in India. Same time, we also do a lot of activities to promote AI awareness. These are few pictures from the our previous like summer school and then the winter school, and then this is our boot camp. So these are the three courses we worked very hard in the last 3 years. Like in the summer school, we start and give the introduction to R, and in the winter school, we give statistics, complete 5 day statistics. And then in the boot camp, we teach how to use Quarto for making website, for writing books, research papers, and how to use GitHub. So, and all this work is done with the support of the Ambedkar Educational Society Sonipat, where this space where we are teaching to the students, it is provided by this organization at no cost to SARA. And about this summer school, it is a 5 days full-time residential summer school, and 10 participants finally able to attend this summer school from UG level to PhD level. And it was completely 5 days, around 40 hours, completely free data science education. And along with me, there were 5 international pro bono guest speakers who joined to give the expert lectures. So this is a one picture from this summer school. And today we completed day 4. And now we have, and we covered today quantitative analysis. And in the series of guest speakers, we had Dr. Jessica, Dr. Ozan from University of Queensland and Edinburgh. And today we have Dr. Bailey from USA. So, and these are 2 more speakers who will join us tomorrow to share their expert, opinions and talk. So, a few words about Dr. Bailey. So, first of all, at the very beginning, thank you so much, to accepting our invitation and agreeing to giving this talk. So, Dr. Bailey holds a PhD in social psychology from University of California, Santa Barbara. And now she works as a business analyst at Kate Farms. So her research applies advanced statistical analysis to understand human cognition and decision making. We are really honored to have you as a guest speaker at third SARA Summer School. And now is over to you, Dr. Bele.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction. I have some slides we're going to go through, so I'm going to go ahead and share that. Uh, Hoping that that goes smoothly because you know how that goes. While we're waiting for my screen to load, yes, it's really cool to see all of the stuff that you all have been working on already. Really cool to see that you are looking towards some really interesting types of analyses and ways of using R. And I'm excited to kind of go into that. So can you all see my screen? So we're going to go ahead and get started then. So just as a little bit of an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, I'm going to start off by just giving you an introduction to my background and my experience and education. I'm going to give you an introduction to kind of the steps along the way, how I've learned how to code, how I learned R, all of the different kind of programs that I've used to get me from, the first coding that I ever did to what I'm doing in R. And then I'm going to show you some ways that I'm using code in different contexts and for different audiences. And then we're going to do some just general takeaways and conclusions there. All right, so an introduction to my background and my education. So I started off, I got my bachelor's in science in psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I started off in the northern US, where I got my bachelor's. So that was 4 years of university. I did my emphasis in psychology, and I was really interested in research while I was there. So I was already starting to do research, but as I'll tell you in a little bit, the emphasis on coding and how we did statistics while I was there was really different than what I would be doing in my PhD. I knew I wanted to do a PhD, and so I really focused on trying to learn all of the skills that I would need going forward. I knew that R was a way to handle and process data, but there weren't a lot of resources for me while I was there. And so I got my bachelor's degree in 2014. I spent 2 years as a researcher at UW-Madison, and then I started my PhD um, at the University of California, Santa Barbara. While I was there, I got my master's along the way. I was here, I started, it says 2015, it should be 2025. I got my PhD in 2025. So it's been about a year. It took me 5 years to do that. My emphasis was in child development, and this is really where my skills and my coding progress in R took off. It's where I learned all of the different kinds of data cleaning, data processing, analyses, and data visualization along the way. When I graduated with my PhD, right now the job market in the United States is not the best for data analysts. And so I had a little bit of a bumpy ride. I started off doing an internship where I worked in the beverage and alcohol industry doing data analysis for a small startup. And then I more recently, in the last 6 months, started working as a business analyst at Cape Farms. So both of these work in the food industry. And that is because I studied food and eating and the social and cultural significance of food as a PhD student. So it kind of really tied in with my experience. So that was just to give you a little bit of background about me. And now I'm going to dive into kind of where my where my process of learning how to code really came from. And so to start, I started coding, if you could call it coding, in Excel. When I was an undergrad, I vividly remember the graduate student that I was working with asking me to go into Excel and make it looked much nastier and much harder than this. These if-then statements in Excel to try to get us to one number that we needed. And I was writing these all out by hand each time. Um, and it was so frustrating. It was so frustrating because it's not reproducible. So anything you do in Excel, you kind of have to either copy and paste, you have to redo it each time. It's really clunky. Any type of errors that you're getting is hard. And then if you're trying to do things where you want to customize it, it's really limited. You can't do the same kinds of advanced analyses that you want. And so we were just trying to clean data. And I vividly remember her telling me that she learned in her stats class how to do this in R. And I remember thinking, I need to learn how to do this. I need to figure out how to do this because it was so frustrating to learn this in R. I'll also take a moment to say that if you have questions along the way, please stop me, tell me to slow down, tell me to stop, and we can absolutely chat about any of these topics as we go, but we'll dive a little bit more into the specifics of R in just a little bit. So the next program that I started to use was this program called SPSS. So this is one that's really used in the social sciences primarily, and it's similar to R, but it's not coding. So what you end up doing is a lot of point and click. So you drag and drop your variables into these different boxes, and you can create these different kinds of tables and do these kinds of analyses. There are a lot of downsides with this. It's not customizable. It's really difficult to get exactly what you want. If you want to create really interesting and visually appealing graphs, you can't do that as easily. It costs a lot of money. You need a license for it, so it's not really accessible, and it's not used universally. So when I talk about SPSS to groups of people, sometimes they have, no idea what I'm talking about because it's not a regularly used program. And that's totally fine because it costs a lot of money. So where does that leave us? And that really left us with R. And so I'm giving you just a snapshot of some of the code that I've written. This was the first code that I wrote in grad school, really. And starting to code in R opened up a world for me that was totally different. There are so many wonderful things about R. It's free. So it's super accessible to anybody who wants to use it. It's open source, so you can go online, you can look at a bunch of different resources, and you can get a really good idea of what other people are doing. And it's so customizable. All of these things you can do um, independently of what other people are doing. So you can have it fit exactly what you want it to do. And so I'm going to say that it took me a really long time to get to this point. I started learning R and programming in undergrad. And when I learned this in my first stats class, it was really a brief introduction to it. And the way that they tested us on our ability to use R was during tests, we weren't allowed to use our computer, which I thought was strange. But we would actually write the code on paper using pen and paper, which feels like something they would do 100 years ago. But that was how they did it. So I was writing code by hand to demonstrate my knowledge of it. In undergrad, it was really mixed between this SPSS and R. And so, when you're trying to learn a new coding language, um, it's really difficult when you're bouncing back and forth when you're not using it consistently. And in grad school, that's when I really started to learn R and learn coding. And I started with the very basics. We started just learning how to load in packages, call in our packages, load in our data. How do you get a mean? How do you get a standard deviation? And it really builds quickly. And I'll say that learning a coding language is, truly like learning a language. You're learning something totally new, and it requires a lot of practice. And so it wasn't until I got to graduate school and I was using R and I was coding in R almost every day that I really saw myself getting better. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, some tips and tricks to learning R. But by the time I was done with my graduate program, I was teaching boot camps in the summer on how to use R. I was showing my researchers that I worked with, I was teaching them how to read or how to write in R and code in R. And it really became kind of something that I was not just, good at, but passionate about making sure that people learned about. And one of the reasons why I'm super excited to be here and show you all of the really cool things that I've been able to do in R. And so with that, I'm going to start walking us through um, R as a researcher and as an analyst. So I talked a little bit about kind of this progression between the two, um, but I started off using R as a researcher. So I'll talk a lot about what that looked like and the kinds of things that I did as a researcher, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about what it looks like to use R and to code in R and to be an analyst at a different type of institution. So I worked primarily as a researcher at a university. So for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, I was doing research at a university and I was using my coding skills to analyze data that came from experiments that I was running, that I was fully in charge of the data. And that looks a lot different than collecting data as a researcher or an analyst at an institution like a business. And so to start off, I'm just going to talk a little bit about data cleaning. So one thing that I'm going to note, I'm not sure if you've talked about kind of some of the different ways that we can look at R and the different interfaces for R, but this is what mine looks like. So I keep mine in dark mode because it's easier on my eyes, but also I'm using R Markdown. So you'll see some things that are a little bit different, such as the way that the code is presented up here, where you can see the different code chunks. All that means is that I can kind of control the way that the code runs. Um, and I'm also going to make some notes here too about just setting up pages. So when I start coding, before I do absolutely anything, I want to make sure that I'm well organized, that I'm well situated in my code and in my markdown files, because it's much harder to go back and reorganize the code after the fact. So sometimes it's easy enough to use a notebook to just kind of scribble in your plans as you're coding along because you're just trying to figure out what you're doing. Other times, I think it's really, really helpful to keep things in these very organized chunks. The other thing that I do is I'm constantly annotating my code. As a graduate student, as a researcher, we talk a lot about reproducibility. And it's something that I emphasize when I talk about the benefits of R, is that everything is reproducible. I could send you the files that I used along with the code that I used, and you should be able to get the exact same answers by just simply hitting run on this code. And that's not necessarily the same case for other types of programming and languages. But what I also want is I don't want you to just be able to hit play or hit run and get the same code. I want you to know what's happening. I want you to know why I'm doing each step. So this is really the first step that I'm doing is I'm loading in my data packages, my data and my packages step by step, um, and starting to clean the data. And so what you can see here is just kind of the first step. I like to start with, um, this code and this package that a friend of mine showed me. It's called Pac-Man. And what it does is it makes it super easy so that I don't have to load in all of my packages individually. I can load them in all in this one function here, load in my data, set things up, and then start the process of data cleaning. And so um, you all already started talking about data cleaning and some of the important aspects of that, but I'm going to show you a little bit of the code that I've used to do data cleaning. So this one is a little bit messy, and this is because the way that I got my data was through a survey that I created, and I needed to create these new scales based off of the different questions that were coming in. And so one of the things here, I'm going to note that I have some, you can see above the data cleaning that I've got the pound sign, that's going to create when I export my R Markdown file, you're going to be able to see these headers. It'll export as either a PDF or an HTML file, whichever one I've decided that I want to export it as. It'll have these really nice headers that I can click into. But you can also see that at the start of this chunk of data, it says R data cleaning. And what that'll do is in your environment, you can see, or in your console, you can see this tab, and you'll be able to use it kind of as a table of contents to find the chunks that you're interested in, jumping to bit by bit. So here's some very, start off data cleaning that I've done. What I'm really trying to do with data cleaning is automate the process. Some of the data cleaning that I do is kind of a one-off thing where I have this data that is just mine, and I want to clean it up so that I can do some of these more advanced analyses that I've done in the past. Um, and I'm trying to get that done. But other times I'm working with a team of analysts, or I'm working with a team of researchers, or they're working on their own analyses, their own projects, and I'm trying to create a system that's going to be easy for all of us to utilize. And so one of the bits of code that I did in the past was really to annotate and automate this process. So um, when I was a graduate student, I primarily worked with children. And as a researcher working with children, one of the things that you have to think a lot about is how do we create research practices that are going to be useful for children that they can actually engage with. And part of that challenge is that when we give a survey to adults, they can read all of the lines and they can click on their answers, and you can get some really nice, clean data right out the bat. It needs very little data cleaning. It needs very little data processing to get you to the kind of code that you need at the very end to be able to do these analyses. However, with children, they can't read in the same way that adults can, and they have a lot harder time clicking on these scales of a 1 to 5 scale. And so when I started my PhD, we were doing data collection in the middle of a global pandemic. I started in the fall of 2020. And so we were collecting data online with children, which is really difficult. And so we were using Qualtrics, which is a survey platform, and we were creating these more complex ways of asking questions from children. And what that gave us on the back end was some really complicated data that didn't make sense when you would input it in R. You couldn't easily create these data files that you would need to be able to do the analyses that we were going to be doing. And so what I created using R was this automated process that was then utilized by all of the other researchers in our lab that automated our ability to clean this data, to go from these um, point and click areas that kids would use to data that was actually useful, that would tell us what kids were using. And so that required me to take all of the knowledge that I had had in R, as well as utilizing my resources to clean this data. And so that's the kind of work that I'm doing now, or that I was doing then. The kind of data cleaning that I'm doing now as a business analyst is a lot different. The kind of data that I get in is much larger data sets, and I don't have the same control over where this data is coming from, how it's being collected, and kind of what the front end part of it looks like. So a lot of our data now as a business analyst, as somebody who's working for a business, is being collected from our consumers. Previously, when I worked at Overproof, which was a startup, the kind of data that I was using was web scraping data, which again, I didn't have control over how it was collected. And so it makes it so you're doing a lot more data cleaning. And so I was working, I went from working with data where I was really in charge of how the data was collected, what it looks like when it comes into my computer, and what is going to be the easiest way to handle that data, to something where I'm dealing with data that is a lot messier. It's a lot harder to process. And so I'm doing a lot more data cleaning. I'm also dealing with much larger data sets. The kind of data that you handle as a researcher is often smaller data sets. And when they talk about large data sets, it's often, several hundred people. And now I'm looking at data from several thousand people across several thousand interactions across, you know, a decade. And so you're looking at data at a much larger scale. And so it just changes the way that you approach these data cleaning processes. But what I'll do is I'll turn to some of the analyses that I've run, and I'll walk you through kind of what these analyses look like, and what they mean and what I've used them for. And so when I started off, a lot of the kind of work that I was doing was things like correlations, t-tests, chi-squares, um, and calculating the mean, median, mode, descriptive statistics for the data that I'm working on. So I'm just showing you right now kind of an example of one of the correlations that I ran across my data. So here we're looking at data from actually from my dissertation, where I'm looking at two different scales to see if they are correlated with each other. So I ran I think it was 10 different correlation tests to see if they were all correlated in different ways. And so you can see that I'm actually, I'm not just running the test, but I'm saving the test. I'm calling it one, and then I call back that one to see the output. So I'm using the function core.test, and I'm using that between in my data frame data two, the variable moral wrong, and in data two, rude. And so to give you a little bit of context as to what these variables mean, what I was doing was I was showing participants these short stories about somebody who is at a dinner party and they're eating with friends, and their friend who is hosting made them a meal. And when the food comes out, we varied what kind of food it was. And then we varied why the person said they wouldn't eat it. And so I mentioned before that my area of study was on social and cultural practices of eating. And one of the things that I was really interested in was not just what people choose to eat, but also what they choose not to eat. Why do they choose not to eat certain foods? And so some of the reasons that we would give um, participants to judge about why the person wouldn't eat the food was because they thought the food was gross, because they're a vegetarian, they don't eat meat and the dish contained meat, because the food was from a different culture and they only eat foods from their own culture, or because they had some sort of allergy to one of the ingredients in the food, because they had religious reasons for not eating it. All of the kinds of reasons that you can maybe imagine somebody would say that they can't eat a certain food, and also some that you probably are thinking, oh, that's incredibly rude. I can't believe somebody would tell their friend that's gross, I'm not going to eat it. We gave them all different kinds of reasons for saying that they wouldn't eat the food. And so we asked them to also rate, how morally wrong it would be to refuse this food, how rude it would be, and a bunch of different questions. We wanted to know how correlated these were to each other. And as you can see here, saying that it was morally wrong and saying that it was rude were really highly correlated. We were trying to, at this point, get an idea of how much these different scale items overlapped with each other, if there were ones that we could collapse across, or if there were ones we could remove from our questionnaire so that we could ask other questions instead. And so we see here what the correlation is. You can see that it gives you the t value as well as the p value and our degrees of freedom, and that these two data points are highly correlated. So these are just some of the ways that we can take a look at um, our data and to see how they're related to each other. But what I'll say is that, this is not, as a researcher, correlation is not the first kind of test that people want to see, or the primary kind of test. It is oftentimes the first test that they want to see because they want to see how um, things are related to each other. But another type of analysis that people are really interested in is the regression analysis. And so there are a lot of different types of regression in here. I'm looking at a linear mixed model. And so when I started off in graduate school, there were a lot of different types of analyses that people would do. And probably the first type of analysis that people are looking at, the first type of regression is a linear regression. And that's probably the one that you're most familiar with. It assumes that your data is mostly following in this linear pattern, and you're trying to see to what extent when one increases, the other increases as well, or when one decreases, the other decreases as well. So how related are they to each other? But there are different types of variables that can go into a regression. There are different types of data collection that you might be interested in. There are different kinds of variables that you might be interested in looking at. And so what I found as I went through my program was that oftentimes the types of regressions that people were talking about, or the types of analyses people were talking about, didn't fit the type of data that I was interested in. Specifically, when we're asking children different questions, um, it's really hard because are they're answering different types of questions, or we're varying different types of things. And so what I needed to do was I needed to learn different types of analyses to really understand um, how these different things related to each other. So I needed to go out and I needed to find these different types of regression analyses, and this is one of them. And so this is going to look different than kind of your standard linear regression, because it's a mixed effects model. And what that means is that you can see I have at the end, I have +1/food. And what that means is that we varied food across the different types of interactions that we had. So I'm looking at very simply, how does somebody's rating of the acceptability of this food refusal, how does that differ based off of the condition that they were in? And in this case, condition meant their reason for food refusal. Um, and then we add in this factor of food. And so one of the things that we wanted to make sure we were thinking about was, is it something about the condition? Is it something about saying the type of food refusal? Or is it something about the kind of food that we're presenting them with? Some people might have an aversion to fish. And so when we present them with a fish meal, and they're reading the description of the refusal, they might think that's perfectly fine because they think fish is gross. And so, of course, it's fine to say that fish is gross, whereas other people might have knowledge about a certain type of meal that we didn't think that they would. And so, when we present them with this type of meal, they actually have this pre-existing knowledge about the meal. And so we went ahead and we added what we call a random effect of food, meaning that we don't think that food should actually have an effect on the outcome. And so we want to remove that effect from our analysis. And so what this gives you is pretty much the same outcome as the other types of regression, but it allows us to um, take away the effect of food and to see what that effect would be. What does that look like if we're just thinking about the type of food? And so I would say that for me as a researcher, regression analyses are the primary type of analysis that I was running. You're running so many regression analyses. As an analyst, I very rarely get to run this type of regression. When I was working, doing my internship and I was working at that startup, one of the things they wanted me to learn how to do was run predictive models. And so doing a predictive model is essentially just running a series of regression analyses over and over and over again with kind of a different type of output. And it's predicting the future based off of a series of regressions. As a business analyst, what I'm doing now is a lot less of this regression analysis and a lot more of your standard demographic and descriptive analyses, just trying to get an idea of what is happening, what are the patterns that are happening. Um, I will say, as somebody who is trained in the regression analyses, I'm trying to add in some of these more advanced statistical and causal analyses that we're doing, but it's hard because you're dealing with people. You're going from, as a researcher, the people who you work with have a really, you know, deep understanding and appreciation for this type of analysis, and everybody is working on a similar type of project in R. They all kind of have had that same experience, and then you move into a setting where people aren't using R. Some of the people that I'm working with have never touched R. They don't even understand what that looks like. They have no concept of what these types of analyses could be or what they could look like, or what they even mean underneath the hood of it all. And so you're really um, trying to get them on board with what these numbers mean. They want one number that they can take to, a CEO or a CFO or a COO or a VP and say, this is what's happening on our side. This is what we recommend. And so oftentimes, if I'm running something that looks more like this, I'm doing a lot of teaching and explaining of what that means and what that um, looks like. And so I'll go to one more type of analysis that I learned how to run in graduate school, and that is SEM, or a structural equation model. And so this is kind of this is also from my dissertation. I realized I'm using all examples from that, and that's probably because that's the most um, prominent on my brain as I'm thinking about this. It's the most recent study that I've done, but when you look at a structural equation model, this is one of the more, this is the last kind of model that I learned how to do when I was in graduate school. It was the last class that I ever took. And you can see that what it's showing you is these different types of pathways and how they're related to each other. So your asterisks here, your stars here, just like how you would expect them to in other types of visuals, they show you what is significantly related to each other. So you can see that condition is significantly related to what we're calling similar here and is significantly related to what we're calling rude, but this variable purity is not related to similar, but similar is still related to rude. And then we have this dotted line here, which is just showing you the relationship between condition and purity. And so to give you a little bit of background as to what I'm talking about in this visual, so we can talk a little bit about a structural equation model just from a very high level point of view is, again, this is looking at that food refusal. And what that means, we have condition being the reason for refusal. And then I asked participants to rate their values. And so, I had this thought that perhaps part of the reason why people are feeling a certain way about these refusals is because of their values. One of them being this sense of purity, that they value um, purity over other types of value. And I thought maybe the purity would make them feel similar to the person who is refusing, and that's why they would think it was rude. In fact, that wasn't the case, but we do see that the condition that they were in, so the reason for refusal, was related to their feelings of similarity. And their feelings of similarity were what were predicting whether or not they thought the refusal was rude. And so this structural equation model allows us to get kind of a holistic picture. Instead of looking at the relationship between two variables or the relationship between um, two variables on one variable, we can see kind of a path analysis of how do we get from one to the next. It kind of takes us stepwise through these relationships. And so, what you can do is you can see kind of on the back end, it tells you how good is the model that you've created, how good is that at actually fitting the data that you have. And so you go step by step of trying to see, well, okay, I thought that it was going, excuse me, I thought it was going to be this model where it was going to say, it was going to fit like this, but it doesn't actually fit very well. And so we need to go back, we need to adjust the model, we need to think more about it. And your model is based in the theories that you have, but it's also based in these ad hoc, after the fact ways of thinking about the analyses. And so this is just one possible model that you could run and you could think about. So I know that you've already talked a lot about data visualization. I really love to think about data visualization. I love getting to make graphs. This is probably the primary thing that I am doing in my job now, where I am making graphs that get to go in um, talks to executives. They get to go in different types of visuals that go to um, my coworkers and my boss, and lets us really understand what is happening with our data. But it was also some of the really fun stuff that we got to do when as a graduate student. So, what we're looking at here right now is one type of data visualization. This does help us to visualize how our data is related to each other, but it's not necessarily what you would think of in kind of the classic sense. So we're going to look at some of the graphs that I made as a graduate student. So here is a line graph looking at the spread of data. So again, one of the things that I think is just absolutely wonderful about R is that you get to fully customize the way that you want your visuals to look. It is one of the things that whenever I switch to a different program, I find it to be so frustrating because working in R, and specifically these were all built in ggplot, working in ggplot is so easy and intuitive and just fun. I think it's fun to get to explore all of the different things in ggplot, in R, to create these visuals. And so here is another example from my dissertation. So you have these two conditions. Right now we're looking at refusing food because you're a vegetarian versus refusing food because you only eat a certain kind of cultural food. So vegetarian is in that purple line, and the cultural refusal is in that pink line. Again, super fun because I get to pick all of the colors. I get to pick how much of the data points we get to see on the graph. You can show all of them or some of them or none of them. You get to customize your axis labels and whether you want grid lines, all of that. So some of the fun things that we've gotten to do with this is creating different types of visuals for posters at conferences. And once you're done with the work part, which is the research, actually doing the hard work of the research, you can go in and you can really customize all of your different graphs to fit a fun visual theme. So here again, you can see just kind of an interaction here. So I really like these lines, line charts, these line graphs to be able to see interactions. It's not the only way that you can visualize interactions. One of the ways that we've looked at interactions is by taking a look at the split between these different standard deviations. So now you're looking at the data split between um, similarity, one standard deviation above the mean, below the mean, and at the mean, and these different types of ratings. So you you can visualize data in a lot of different ways to really get an idea of what's happening. I think that your real storytelling happens visually, and I won't dive too deep into this because I know you've had an entire day learning about data visualization. Um, but I'm going to wrap up this portion just by talking about some of the different ways that we can export our data and we can look at our data. Um, so I talked a little bit about R Markdown. So when I first started working in R, I really was looking at just opening up a document in R and just starting to code in R. And very quickly, I had instructors teach me R Markdown. And I find R Markdown to just be so helpful when it comes to visualizing the data and then being able to export it into these really beautiful PDFs or HTML files that you can see and you can interact with, and then to be able to share those files with somebody. They can see your code, they can see what the output is. It's visually a lot easier to interact with. And it was super helpful when I was dealing with, um, you know, people in academia who maybe don't have time to open up my code and look at it. They don't need to rerun it. They just want to see it. The other thing I'll mention, and it sounds like you have a boot camp that talks about using Quarto. This is something that I learned relatively recently, within the last year of my PhD. I was introduced to Quarto, and it is the only way that I do any of my coding in R now. It is so wonderful, and you can do just absolutely incredible things with Quarto. Um, I won't get into too much of the details of this, but some of the ways you can export are to PDFs and HTMLs. It sounds like you already talk about how to build a website with this, but I just learned how to do that with these linked pages and to do your own locally hosted website. You can make just some beautiful, beautiful pages with that. And I, was curious as to how deep you can get into this kind of Porto hole of making these web pages. And there's so much. There's so many just absolutely amazing things that you can do with this and ways that you can code not just the visuals, but integrate your analyses, integrate your statistics into a way of presenting your data so that it is accessible to a lot of different audiences. And it's been really, really fun to learn and explore that. Um, and then I want to talk a little bit about what this transition looked like for me from going from a research context to a business context, and what kind of the differences are. And I'll say that, you know, when you move from one context to another, a huge thing that shifts is the problem that you're trying to solve. You're going from being a researcher, being somebody who um, is trying to uncover new knowledge that is grounded very deeply in theory and building upon the different types of research that other people have done to trying to solve this business problem. So some of the questions that I've been asked to do, I talked a little bit about the predictive model that I was asked to build, but I've also been asked to do things like learn more about our customer. Who is the consumer? Tell us about the consumer. Tell us how we should staff our customer service hotline. How do we need to think about the amount of calls that come into our hotline? Things like that, where it's a very different type of question that we're answering. I will say the other huge difference, and maybe this one is the primary one, is who is your audience? Before I was dealing with groups of people who were deeply entrenched in the world of R and coding and statistics. And now I live in this world of people who don't know coding and don't know statistics. And I am the expert in what I'm doing. I'm no longer learning and I'm no longer learning in a formal sense. But I'll say, in a little bit, I'll talk a little bit about how you should always be learning. But I'm not surrounded by people who are there primarily to teach me what to do. And so I am the expert. I am the one who is teaching them what they need to know about it. And also thinking about what is the context that they need, what is the context that they want to get from this. And then thinking about what tools best answer your question as you're transitioning from research to business and back to research. What are the things that you need to really think about as you're diving into these new types of questions? What are the tools that you need to answer that question? And so finally, I want to leave us with some conclusions and some takeaways as I kind of reflect on my journey as a researcher, as a business analyst, what I learned, and kind of where I think the world should go with this. So one thing that I'll say is I mentioned before that, I didn't really start making progress and, really seeing that progress until I was using R consistently. So keep practicing. The only way that you can truly fail in your coding is if you stop trying. Um, there were many times where I felt like, oh my gosh, I just feel like I am in this cyclical thing of like, I learn how to load in my data and load packages, and then I stop, and then I have to relearn how to do that. And that's the only thing that I'm learning. And so, when I started working as a graduate student, when I started, really diving into it, I was determined to make it past that threshold. And when I, run my own boot camps, when I run my own programs, I push our students to go past that hump of just learning, how do you get into R? We have to really dive deep so that they have something that they can practice, that they have something they can use. So when you leave this summer camp, when you leave your program, don't stop working in R. Use your skills and keep practicing. It's just like any other type of muscle or skill. I really equate this to actually learning a language, which as somebody who has been desperately trying to learn a second language for a very long time, it's because I don't practice consistently that it is so difficult to learn that second language. The next thing I will say is stay curious, stay learning, stay trying. R is open source, which means that people are doing things constantly. It has truly unlimited resources and options. Explore different things. The potential with R is endless. I told you that I learned how to use Quarto at the end of my my time in graduate school, and I didn't want that to be the end. And so I continuously learn how to build on those skills. I learned how to make just a very simple Quarto document, and that's when I was learning how to do structural equation modeling. That's how we did all of our models in Quarto, as we made these files. And I thought to myself, surely there has to be more. There has to be more ways that I can use this. And I was like, what can I do to bring some of these projects to life? There are things that I haven't even touched that I'm so interested in. I want to learn more about connecting different types of data into R, getting API keys to pull data straight from websites. I want to learn more about creating apps using R. There are endless possibilities. There are endless analyses that you can do in R. And so stay curious, use those options, um, and just keep at it. The next thing I'll say is ask questions. Ask questions all the time. Use all of the resources at your disposal. Um, the next slide, I'm going to give you all of my information, my contact information. Reach out to me, connect with me on LinkedIn. Um, Talk to your instructors here. Um, Talk to your instructors wherever you are at, wherever, whatever institution you're at. Talk to your friends. I learned so much. One of the things that, I had a colleague that I worked with in graduate school, and she was, so good at, using tidyverse. Her goal every time she got into R was, how can I do this with as few lines of code as possible? How can I make this as efficient as possible was her goal every time. And she would do that. She was so good at it, and I would come to her with my questions. Um, she was definitely my R buddy. We started off in the same, cohort, and when we were building these cool visuals, we started off with just the basics, and every time we would make a new visual, every time we'd make a new graph, we would add a layer on, and we'd add a layer on, and we'd add a layer on, and we'd talk to each other about it. And, I'd ask her like, oh, how did you get that to look this way? How did you get it to be, transparent background? And she'd show me, and she'd ask me, how did you get, you know, a new theme added in? And I would show her, and we'd go back and forth, and we'd learn so much from each other. Use your online resources. There are videos, there are discussion boards, there are free classes, and use AI as a resource. It sounds like you're going to talk more about that in this workshop and in other workshops. Um, I found I'm very hesitant in my AI adoption, but I found that it is such a great resource, if not for, helping make writing code more efficient. Debugging code is sometimes really frustrating when you get an error that tells you something and you're like, I don't understand why this is happening. Sometimes popping it into, using AI to figure that out is super helpful. Sometimes that can be really, really beneficial. And so ask questions, reach out to people, use, use your network to learn more and keep learning, keep exploring, stay curious. So with that, thank you so much for allowing me to come speak and tell you everything that I've done in R, and giving you kind of an overview of what R looks like as a researcher. I have my email up here. I also have my LinkedIn. So reach out to me, um, connect with me, contact me. I am so happy to talk to you more about what it's like to be a graduate student in the US, what it's like to transition into industry, what it's like to use your R skills in all kinds of different contexts. So happy to talk more about that. But thank you so much. This was really great, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions you have.
Okay, great. Fantastic. So let's take a pause for a minute, and because we all are sitting in the same room, so students can only participate via chat, right? So let's give them a
Okay,
minute and jot down their thoughts and questions and drop them in the chat box, and I will read those one by one for you.
perfect.
Then we will just start the question answer session. Great, thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, so let's begin. I'm reading the first question. So the first question is from Mr. Yogendra. He is a PhD student and at one famous university in India, JNU. So he says, "Hi, Dr. Bele, Yogendra Kumar this side. Thank you for your insights into our programming. I am working around student suicides in Indian higher education institutions. As you know, there are many factors such as caste, class, genders, region, religion, education, resource, personality, etc., which can be invoked to understand suicide. The problem is with the regression. Uh, these are the variables which also influence each other in the same way as they do to suicide. Ma'am, how to progress regression for it?
Okay. Um, yeah, so all of your variables are related to each other, but they're also related to your outcome variable. I don't think that it's not totally unheard of that that's going to happen. I think you see that a lot. I think there are some, and I don't know off the top of my head, there are some post hoc tests. So after you're done running your regression, you should be able to go in and then look at the relationship between those variables. I also might recommend doing something sort of like a structural equation model, where instead of looking at all of these variables kind of together, you're looking at how they're relating to each other and then to the outcome. So it could be that, like religion is relating to, um, I'm trying to remember some of the other variables that you were talking about. Or like caste might be related to resources, right? And that might be the thing that is actually predicting it. It might not be that caste is directly relating to your outcome variable. It's actually working through um, your other variables. So I would recommend thinking about either some sort of um, um, model like that, or looking at these things as interactions between each other. So they're going to be correlated, but they're also going to have some sort of interaction with each other. Um, but I'm happy to discuss like more direct like examples if you want to send me an email, we can chat about the exact um ways that you could do that.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Yogendra. Let's go for the next question. This is from Dr. Ashok. Dr. Ashok is a PhD professor in the field of bioinformatics and bioengineering. And his question is, I have a PhD and a teaching career in bioinformatics. How can I transition into business analytics? What AI era skills should I learn? And how can I leverage my research experience to build a successful career?
This is such a great question. And so related because I just, you know, did this. Um, it's so interesting because I think a lot of times when you're transitioning from an academic career to like a business analytics career, people are just really excited that you have a PhD. They don't really know what that means. But as far as leveraging your experience to build a successful career, one of the things that I found just in the last, year of this transition is that for me, the skill that translates the most is that I find that myself and other PhDs are incredibly resourceful. We have a really good skill of being able to, like, if I don't know it, I can figure it out. And I will figure it out. Um, because that's what you do in your PhD is you don't know something and you learn it along the way. So leverage that resourcefulness. Um, on top of that, I think finding a um, an industry in business that overlaps with your research to move into this analytics part. You might not find something that's perfectly overlapping or perfectly aligned. But for me, I was working in this space that looked at food and culture and why eating is so important. And the job I have now is I work for a medical nutrition company. So I work for a company that is founded on the idea that people with severe allergies, with disabilities, who can't eat solid food, they deserve to share a meal with their family and their friends and to have good, nourishing food. And it's something that I believed in so deeply that I got a PhD in it. And that overlap helped um, with transitioning um, to this career in business analytics. I think also the kind of last thing I'll say about the transitioning is think about what your audience is. So when I talked about that big difference between research and business analytics, it's really about how you communicate your skills to other people, how you communicate stats to other people. So when you get into an interview, when you start talking to people, you have to switch your mindset from being a researcher who is working with people who know stats, who is working with people who want to dig into the deepest, nooks and crannies of the data to somebody who is trying to solve a business problem. And so that transition is difficult in thinking about how you're doing that, but is useful. AI era skills. I will say that I am not the forefront AI user. I am very hesitant about AI. I have, a friend he runs a small business and he just puts all of his data into a chat bot, and I internally scream every time he does that because I don't fully, trust that I like the manual work of sitting down with R and using it. But I think that when I have used I use it a lot for brainstorming these new types of analyses that I can run, new types of visuals that I could use, or debugging code. Um, I will say that there is, on the brainstorming end of things, I don't think that I could ever learn everything there is to know about what you can do in R. And so I use AI to help me think of like, I have this problem. How do I get to the solution that I want with it? Great. Now I know, and I can go and run and do that. Um, I will also say that debugging code is like AI does such a great job with that. Um, I used to get errors that would throw errors about my graphs or about an analysis where I'm like, I don't know where I'm missing a comma, and I would throw it into R or throw my R code into ChatGPT, and it would tell me where my missing comma was. And it just saved me 30 minutes of looking through every single spot, which has been really nice. But yeah, that's what I'll say on AI.
Awesome. So next question is from Mr. Rajat. Rajat says, hi, Dr. Bele. I am a second year student doing BS in data science. I wanted to know that which skill do you think is currently underrated but will become very important for data scientists over the next 5 years. So all are worried about the AI skills and the future. And that's yeah. Please go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I think this is so interesting. So, I yeah, I resonate a lot with this worry about AI and what are the skills that we need to learn because again, I have a friend who has a small business and one of the things that I've been talking about with him is this idea that I want to start helping, small businesses run their data and do, data analytics with them. And so we were talking about, you know, what that could look like. And he was like, what you need to think about is why should I, as a small business, spend money to ask you to do this when I could throw it into ChatGPT or Claude and do it myself? And so I've been thinking about this a lot, right? Like, what is it that I bring to the table as a data scientist that is better and more useful? And truly, the thing that I will say is that you are a human expert in that field. You know what you are doing. And so, yes, other people can put their data into ChatGPT. They don't know why they are getting the answers they are getting. They don't know why it comes out the way that it does. They only know what ChatGPT tells them to do. You as a, data scientist have the background. You know what you're doing. You can explain it in a way that is um, digestible and understandable and is beneficial for a business. So I think that really the skills that are going to be the most important is you're going to learn all of this data science that is useful, and then you're going to learn how to communicate that. I think science communication and science literacy are going to become very important over the next 5 years. Just being able to really like explain all of the deep background that goes into um, what you're doing is going to be important. And use the tools, use AI, use those tools to your advantage, but don't become so reliant on them that you forget your own, power as a data scientist, as somebody who has a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills as well.
Great. So I have a question and query from this comment, your answer. What do you mean by science literacy? Can you please help me to understand more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm talking about science literacy, I'm talking about understanding the concepts of the scientific method of testing things and creating a hypothesis, testing your hypothesis, coming to a conclusion, and doing it all over again. Also, this understanding of what is actually happening on the back end of your analyses. So what I've seen from people who will throw data into Claude or ChatGPT is that they don't really understand what a regression is. They don't understand what a structural equation model is or what an ANOVA is, why you would do that sort of test. They don't understand what the assumptions are behind that. And so you have this understanding and what I'm calling science literacy of knowing what is happening behind the scenes. So holding on to that so that you are truly an expert in what you're doing. So that's what I mean.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And because like recently, Sarah started a Sarah book club, and after working 3 years for these data science courses, we are also started Sarah book club, and we are developing a bridge course through that. And in that, like we are covering the basics of science, social, politics, geography, political economy, because there are students who because of different reasons they could not get the education as they're supposed to, So it is like a
Mhm.
bridge course, so they can refresh, revise, or upgrade, essential education. So when I heard science literacy, that's why I just want to understand it more, like because we started something like that. Because with the AI, people are more happy just with the result, irrespective whether they understood something out during the process or not. And as a teacher, it worries me because without understanding what actually they're doing, they're just very relaxed with the output, you know. And
Yes.
so
Yeah.
thank you.
Absolutely. I think having that context, having that knowledge about what is happening on the like in the world and what is influencing all of the data that you're putting in is crucial. I don't think that you can look at data without taking into account all of the biases that go into it. Whenever I'm doing any sort of analysis, even as a business analyst, one of the things that I list out is all of the biases that we have in the data. And so sometimes that is, the bias of sampling. Where did we get our data from? Sometimes that's a bias in how we're interpreting it. I just wrote up a document that was, you know, all of the biases that we have of this new analysis that I ran. And some of it was like, hey, we need to be really conscious of the fact that when we were doing this, there were layoffs at this period of time, or there was a staffing shortage at this time, and we need to think about that. But ChatGPT doesn't know that there was a staffing shortage at that time. So it doesn't understand that these blips mean something different. So we have to understand the context that our data is coming in with to be able to do that. And, when I was studying as a researcher, that context looked a little bit different. It looked like, what is the global context of um, the data that I'm collecting? What is the real, you know, what else is happening in the world that is making this happen? And that's why when you see papers, there's this long discussion section. And I like you really hope that people don't lose that as we go into this new AI era. We need to stay um, kind of cognizant of that.
Yes, I agree with you. And with this, let's go for the next question. And I hope that this is the
So,
last question. Hello, Dr. Belli. This is Priyanka. I am a doctorate in political science and working in academics full time. Thank you so much for this session. We see a lot of study today, even in social science, which is totally based on data and quantitative analysis. I want to get a brief account on how did you integrate your theory in psychology, which you must have based your doctoral research on, into your study while doing regression analysis. Just want a glimpse of that through an example.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I will say that as a researcher, so much of my analyses are really based on this deep foundation of theory. Going back to the like some of the structural equation modeling that I showed you, all of that is based on theory that was developed before me and theories that I developed myself. And so, when we're looking at developing a new model, whether that be a structural equation model or a regression model, you want to think about how these variables are relating with each other in kind of the broader context of um, what is happening, right? So you want to know like do these variables actually relate to each other in in theory, in concept? Have there been previous studies that have been done? And so some of those show that there was research about political affiliation in the types of food that people eat. So I read many papers about how in the United States, liberals are more likely to be vegetarian, they're more likely to be accepting of vegetarians. They're more likely to have friends who are vegetarians. And so that's where we started to develop this idea about um, liberal participants maybe being more accepting of refusals from vegetarians. And so a lot of it is based on this theory. One of the things that, I haven't gotten a huge opportunity to do as a graduate student, but have been doing more as a business analyst is starting to pull in, you talk about the quantitative analysis and these regressions, but thinking about the qualitative as well. So we also oftentimes get different types of, short answers from people, or I get to talk to people about their experiences. I have a whole study that I did with my friend Shreya, who I was in grad school with the entire time, and it was fully built off of her experience. Her parents immigrated to the United States from India, and the whole study was based off of her experience of, you know, eating different types of foods in the United States, and her experience in the lunchroom bringing different foods. And so, we build these studies and we kind of boil it down to a number, but the real like heart of these quantitative analyses come from both theory and experience. And so I think this is part of that science literature that or science literacy that we talked about, is really understanding where these theories come from and why we're doing this, not just from, a previous science experiment and the history of science, but also from the real human experience that people are having, especially in, psychology or political science, where people are having these experiences on a daily basis. You want to do work that really represents the human experience.
Awesome. Great. We have a follow-up question from Mr. Rajat. If an undergraduate student has the goal of working as a data scientist abroad in the next 4 or 5 years, what achievements would you expect to see on their profile by the time they graduate? Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is a great question. Honestly, what I would expect to see and what I would want to see on somebody's profile or their CV or their resume is that they're gathering a lot of different experiences, and that they're exploring a lot, especially if you're an undergraduate student. I would want to see that you've tried a bunch of different things, that you're searching out and you're taking initiative to find different things. Coming to a program like this is such an amazing way to demonstrate that you are excited and you want to learn and you have experience. One of the things that I think a lot of people in my circle here are doing is doing their own kind of data projects, to just figure out what they want to do, and doing that independently and posting that on LinkedIn, having some sort of portfolio of data projects that you've done. So, for example, I have a friend who is, working on a project just for the fun of it, where you can find publicly available data and you can run with it. Um, do your own project, come up with your own analyses, make a website of your own. I'm not a big GitHub user, but people use GitHub and they make profiles and they post their projects, and it's such a good way to demonstrate your skills, and it will get you noticed a lot faster than other things like trying to send out resumes. Anything where you have a tangible outcome, that's really the way that you want to demonstrate your knowledge. That shows a lot more than a line on a resume or a line on a CV. So that would be my recommendation.
Yeah. And I completely say I agree with all the points you mentioned here. And with this, I guess no more question and query. But and thank you so much, for brilliantly answering all the questions. And thank you so much, Dr. Bele. This is our first and definitely not the last. We are going to have several meetings, and we are going to trouble you more to take your insights, take your knowledge, and, sharing more future SARA students, with us, share this knowledge, your knowledge with all the future SARA students. And we are really honored to have you. We learned a lot from you. And yeah, if you want to say something to participants, please. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So may I request every participant just to open the video? We can have a screenshots as a memory that we all attended this, please. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. So, and I know today is the fourth day, Dr. Bele, and right now in India it is 10 p.m. And I really salute the dedication of these students.
Yeah.
From morning we started 9 a.m. and now it's 10 p.m. So really, I really salute to all the students and as well as to you as well, to getting
Yeah.
up morning and taking the session. So I will just try. Yeah,
Much
I'll
for
take.
being so
Yeah,
flexible and being willing to come so late.
yeah.
I really appreciate that. Although I was ready to be up at 4:30 in the morning for you all, so I would have done it.
So let me just on the count of three, I will take the screenshot. So 1, 2, 3. Okay. So thank you so much, everyone. Good night and very good day ahead for you, Dr. Bele. And really, we learn a lot from you. And very soon, we will trouble you more for more of your insights. Thank you so much. Bye bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.